Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 social, cultural, and political factors in Unit 1. Number 10, we have the patriarchy. So the patriarchy is basically when the men are in control of the situation. So this started showing up in a lot of civilizations when they started becoming more permanent, and with agriculture. With agriculture, the men were doing more of the heavy work, actually farming and all. So over time, they gained more power. So this actually developed in every civilization, and it allowed to men to be in total control. They were able to control like any laws, laws pertaining to women, marriages, and stuff like that. And so they made all the policies, and females were at like a lower level. As I mentioned earlier, it existed in all civilizations, and it still does in some today. So for number 9, we have reincarnation. So this is mostly seen in Hinduism, but in a lot of other religions too. So basically it means that once you die, you come back to Earth again in a different form, and it was almost a cycle of endless suffering. So these types of religions helped lead to the development of salvation religions, and it favored the upper castes, because when you're reincarnated, like if you're really good, then you'll move up a caste or like a ranking, and if you're bad, you'll move down. So if you're already in an upper caste, it's you move up higher and higher, so you're more likely to get out of the cycle. And so because of the reincarnation cycle and like the cycle of suffering, it made some of the lower caste and the poorer people kind of angry, and it helped to lead to them to switch or convert to salvation religions in later times. Number 8, we have slaves. So already, or this early in civilization, we have slavery, but at this time, you didn't like go out and capture people. It was by like debtors or prisoners of war. And now slavery, those bad, allowed like a lot of things to happen. It allowed for complex agriculture and colossal building projects. This is because leaders could just use them because they're like free labor. You're allowed to use them. If they were paid workers, and you'd have to pay them, and it would be much more expensive. But since they're slaves, you can just order them to do whatever. So because of them, we see the mass like sculptures, monuments, and the type of agriculture that they were able to have back then. Slavery also kind of helped reinforce the patriarchy, because if you were a debtor and you were male, you could sell off your wife or children as slaves to help pay off your debt. Again, already this early, so we start to see class distinctions, and in more extreme case, the caste system. So class distinctions was basically the starting of distinctions between rich and poor. The rich will always have more power, and they're a small elite class, and they'll rule over them a much larger lower class. So it's a small elite governing a large lower class. And so already we see the seeds of rich versus poor and who rules over who. So even though the rich either rule over them, or they have considerable influence over them through kings, because kings are going to ally and listen to rich people over poor people, because rich people tend to have more power. So then we see because the rich people are in power, there might be dissent, and we start to see the seeds for like rebellion later on. Now, a more extreme case of class distinctions is the caste system. So the caste system basically said the unspoken. Like for class distinctions, you see the distinctions, but no one really outwardly says it. But in the caste system, they flat out like named the levels, and it had a religious and a more like social structure to it too. So like depending on your caste, like that was the job, that was the occupation you had. Now both of these limit social mobility, especially the caste system. It was hard if you were poor to become rich, because the rich already kind of have an advantage, and if you were in a low caste, it was almost impossible for you to move up to a higher caste. The caste system also had much more emphasis on like priests and religious figures. So if you were up there, you had a good life. Right, number 6, we have specialized labor. So with the formations of cities, since so many people are coming together, you get a surplus of agriculture, and so this allows some people to do things other than farming. So they specialize, hence the name specialized labor, and they kind of experiment and they discover new things and have new innovations. Now, because they have the free time and they're able to do this, we get huge advancements in how things are done. And this also helps trade a lot because certain areas will like be known for the products they made. So other cities will trade for that products, or certain cities may be the only ones able to make a certain type of product. So it's like more income, a new type of income, and it allows you to have a better lifestyle than you would as a farmer. Okay. We see for number 5 we have the mandate of heaven. So basically it happened in China, and the rulers, they were given their rule by heaven. So if the rulers were good, they would keep their rule, and if they started doing something displeasing or they weren't behaving right or not fulfilling their duties, if heaven didn't like it, then then someone else could take over them. Like they gave away, the heavens stopped approving them, and they would have someone else come in to get rid of that ruler. Now this is extremely important because that means that it was meant for it to happen. Like the takeover between the dynasties was meant to happen. So someone could just come in, take over the empire or the dynasty in China, and no one could say anything about it because it's heaven's will. They were meant to take over it, and who would question heaven's will? So it solidified their rule over the people. And number 4, we have Hammurabi's Code. So the fact that it's a code is already really important. In some civilizations, like in China, they never had an actual code. They had decrees. But if you have decrees, it may not always be carried out. Like local rulers may not follow through, or they might ignore it. But if you have a code that applies to everywhere, then like it's better. You have a more standard set. Hammurabi's code was not the first code. There was actually a set of laws by Ur-Nammu, but this is the more famous one. And it was basically an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Like if I cut off your arm, then you would have to cut my arm back. So we still actually see like references of this, like this philosophy kind of survived to present time, which is pretty cool. That, and it discouraged crime so much because the same thing would happen to you. Like, would you kill someone's son if your son would be killed in response? No. But the biggest thing is that class mattered. If a poor person A stabbed poor person B, then poor person B could stab poor person A. Same thing if it was between two rich people. Now, if you have a rich person and a poor person, and the rich person commits the crime, then they don't have the same crime done back to them. They can just pay a fine and get off with it. So there was loopholes if you were higher up. Right, number 3, we have the divine pharaoh. So this is only in Egypt, and they basically believed, especially in the old ages especially, that the pharaoh was divine. In the Middle and New Kingdom, they're semi-divine, but in the Old Kingdom, they were completely divine. They were seen as a form of their god. And so because of this, they really had no elite class, because there's no one that can contest with or even be near the level of the pharaoh. So because there was no elite class, they had an elaborate bureaucracy of tax collectors, administrators, and generals. And their bureaucracy was set by an advancement of skill. So in other societies, you have nobles, and it's their birthright. If their father had the position, they'll get the position. But in Egypt, anyone could work their way up. It was by your skills. So someone from common birth could make it to a top position. And they were the first society to do this. Number 2 is the monopolization of resources. So this is basically when the ruling class monopolizes on something, or they keep it trap. They hold it so that only they can use it. So this was seen with the Shang in China. So they monopolized on bronze and they regulated it because you could only find the materials needed to make bronze at a river. So they carefully made sure and weighed the amounts so that the bronze would never be stolen. So because of this, the imperial army had better weapons, and the rebellions or the rebels could never get their hands on this. So they stopped the rebellion before it could start. If you're fighting wood against bronze, the bronze is always going to win. And if you have complete control over the bronze, there's no point in trying. So they stopped any chance of rebellion because there would be no point rebelling against them. You would be slaughtered. And number 1, we get an elite class. So in most societies, an elite class developed. Now, these were selective, they were very rich, and they were either the ruling class or they had considerable influence on the king, because the king would align himself with people of more power, compared to peasants, so they were usually the rich. The poor were always dependent on them, and there was dissent against them. So, if there are any rebellions, it's always the poor people against the rich, because the rich are ruling or oppressing them in some way. The rich never rebel against the poor. So that was the top 10 social, cultural, and political factors of Unit 1.